And our next speaker, if he can get himself ready to be on and unmute himself, is Mick Scarlett, well-known journalist, presenter, commentator, and erstwhile disability activist, to give us a rather different view on access and where we are now. Mick, over to you.
Smashing. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for the whole UK Disability History Month team for putting this wonderful event together. Now, history, disability, it's really the history of access, isn't it? That's what it's all about. Access to education, access to homes, access to jobs, access to being able to entertain a life like other people. And we're celebrating 25 years of the Disability Discrimination Act. Hurrah! 10 years of the Equality Act. Double hurrah! And so I've been taking part in lots of events where I, as an older duffer, I'm meeting lots of young people who are either too young to remember the time before the Disability Discrimination Act or weren't even born then. But I was 30 when it came in. So I'd already had quite a fun life so far before I had an equal rights law. And I think it's really important to remind people what it was really like, because so many young people now are kind of going, hey, it came on so far, we've come so far, because it was so bad before. It was dark and we were all in little holes hiding from the world, unable to do anything. But actually, that's not the truth, is it? I was born in 1965 in the wonderful town of Luton, and I was born disabled. And yet I went to a mainstream school at the age of 5. I was very lucky. I just hit that year where you were able to go to a mainstream school if you were disabled. And my school took me, despite I have a disability. I have an impairment. By the time I was 15, I became a full-time wheelchair user. While I was in hospital, my school adapted itself. So when I came out, my school had lifts, disabled toilets. It was accessible. And then I went to sixth form, and that did the same. When I got a place there, it made itself accessible. I advised them it was. Same with my art college. I couldn't go to university, but that was a kind of care package issue, sadly. But I also went out and got a job after this in an accessible office, and then another job in another accessible office. I realized that the work environment wasn't necessarily for me. I mean, you think I'm weird now. You should have seen me when I was 20. Whoa. So I went off and became a musician, and I went off touring the world, doing gigs. That was a struggle, but I was still allowed in. I ran nightclubs. I DJ'd. It wasn't accessible, but it wasn't impossible. And there was a move to improve things. Like I said, my school became accessible and then became a centre of excellence for inclusive education. I went to nightclubs. I started going to London a lot. So much so that I left my fully accessible home in Luton that had just been built and moved to a fully accessible flat in London through Habinteg that had been built in the 80s. So still, we're talking about things were better than we think they were. When I came to London, I started working with nightclubs because I wanted to go nightclubbing a lot. I only moved because it was actually cheaper for me to live in London than it was to pay for all the petrol that I was spending on cars driving down to London to go clubbing. And I remember one of the first place I ever advised was the Ministry of Sound. And I helped them to make the Ministry of Sound one of the first really accessible clubs, level access, accessible toilets in both sexes of the toilet. So you didn't have to go in your special toilet, you're going with your mates. A space that had no strobe lighting. So if you had photosensitive epilepsy, you could go clubbing. Speakers for people who were deaf. It was great. And this is 1991. So it was better than we think. I also started working in television, and I went to America to see what the ADA did. We were all enthralled. What will the ADA mean? And that was very prescriptive. I remember going to Chicago just after it had passed, and all the businesses had closed for ADA adaptations on them. So, of course, in England, all the businesses got worried, and we got the DDA that said reasonable adjustment. And what did that mean? Well, we all expected it would mean that reasonably 25 years later, we'd have access, but we know that's not the case, don't we? So I did some telly. We looked at the DDA. We had the DDA. I was ill in about the year 2000, and I had to retire from television and come back And I was now an old person, and television doesn't like old people, as
You've
we
got
know.
2 minutes.
So I had to upskill, and I trained myself to be an access consultant and started working with businesses getting access built in. And for a while, it was really great. And I still today walk around London and think, I did that. I was part of that. I was involved in that. But eventually I found that businesses understood that they didn't need to do this, that they realized that the reasonable bit was a get out clause. And so my reports went from being stuff they had to do to stuff they would like to do, or stuff that they might do if they could afford it. So I thought, right, get into training. And I now train upcoming architects, designers, managers, businesses, government bodies, why inclusion is important. And this is why I think we are going to see a change, because I don't think 25 years really is something to celebrate at the moment, because I think we haven't seen enough change. But I'm seeing a seed change in the attitudes of government, of business, but also within the young people who work in design. They get inclusive design. All of a sudden, it's just clicked. And I'm working with universities and design students, and I'm really seeing them get the concept and design stuff we want and talk to us about it. And I think that's the big change. That's what we've got to look forward to. And that's what we've got to do. Michelin was saying about all the things we have to do. And it's true, we've always had to fight. But now I think the time is to fight and be proactive. If you're young or old and you need to retrain, train and work in this field. Work in tech. Tell software developers how to make software that works for us so that we're not excluded from the information age. Focus on the things you love and make them accessible. Get involved in forums and bodies and work together, because we can do this. We can make the world better. So in 25 years' time, Disability History Month looks back on us as the beginning of a real change.
Great. Thank you very much, Mick.